I'm going to say something for our Kosher Tube um, participants. I'm wearing a poppy, which in Canada many people wear on November 11th, Remembrance Day, which is for the States it's like Veterans Day. It's a day you remember the people in the country who fought for the country and so forth. So it's a big thing in Canada where everyone walks around with a poppy and remembering the people that fought in the wars. And I always do that. And furthermore, I also hold it's important for myself as a Jew and a rabbi to do so, because we have also benefited from the people who fought wars. I mean, there's Canadians fighting in Afghanistan right now and so forth. And we have to be makir tov. We have to be thankful for the good that we have benefited from. And this is what people would say, but it's chukoseim lo seilechu, you should not follow the ways of the non-Jews. But the truth is that that's only if it's a inexplainable custom. Either it's a custom that's explainable by either avodah zarah, by idolatry, or by licentiousness. You know, explaining to do it for this reason. Well, that reason itself is not a good reason, but the fact is, if there's a good reason and there's a reason for it that's understandable and so forth, and such as in this country recognizing the people that have fought for it, and by extension have fought for Jewish causes as well. I mean, the fact that the Canadians fought against the Nazis, Machshemam, in Second World War and so forth. So I think it's very appropriate to do this. The starting point of the Torah, say morality, the Torah perception, we call revelational ethics, is that there is a decision maker outside of us, i.e. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the system halacha, that is outside of us, that tells us what to do. Okay? Now, it tells us ritual, put on tefillin, take a little bit of esrog. It also tells us moral and ethical statements. Either don't murder, don't kill, but statements outside of us, where the decision making is by an entity outside of us. So that seems to be the starting point of halacha, and the response is to follow the outside system or not follow the outside system. But it seems to be the dynamic is by follow it, do I not follow it, but the good dynamic is to follow it. In that regard, the simplest understanding of that perspective is that or I should say the easiest way to maintain that perspective is to try and lessen anything that will stand in the way of following that outside decision maker, or the outside authority. So you take the example of a slave. Okay, in the extreme, the slave has a master. The slave is not supposed to decide what to do. The master is supposed to tell the slave what to do. And the point is that the slave, it's basically the best interest of the master is the slave doesn't think. The slave doesn't have any of his own interests, any of his own desires, right? In other words, the best way to create a slave is really to create a robot, right? And therefore to always have it that you are abiding by the outside authority. It says jump, you say how high, right? It's that type of perspective where, and any type of self, any type of personal will is in the classic slave perspective is broken, because you don't want any other internal authority. You just want the authority of the external authority. So on the surface, people have projected it onto Torah as well. Okay, this was a classic debate when they talked about the legal authority of the Jewish people, of the Jewish system, that it was legalistic, and that it basically tried to create an authority center outside that didn't have people thinking or feeling or whatever, just to be legal. We follow the law, and that law sets the outside authority, sets the direction, with the result being that the people who follow it aren't in themselves moral, willful individuals. They're just law abiders. Okay, don't think, they don't feel, they're just law abiders. That's classic perception. And there are people who are very strong about the perception. This was a classic attack upon Judaism by Christian scholars and so forth. Kant, rejected Judaism even as a religion. It says because it was all legal authority. Martin Buber was very anti-halacha, very anti the law, because he felt that because this is the way they perceived it. The truth is that their perception is really incorrect, because the fact is when you look into Torah, well, Torah begins with an authority figure, and the perception of Kadosh Baruch Hu as being an authority figure, and the imposition of the law, of halacha, and an outside authority. What happens is, within that perspective, is not the development of what you would think to be a classic slave mentality, chas v'shalom. It's not intended to totally break the will of the followers. Already there is movement within Torah that already says, yes, there's an idea of an outside authority, God, through halacha, but already it actually is giving further instruction that actually builds up the will of the individual. In order to be a Torah-observing Jew, it's not enough to just follow the law with blinders on, okay, just to follow the outside authority. That inherent in the very system is this perspective of building up the individual. And through messages from the Torah itself, we start the building up of the individual. So we've gone through two steps in this regard. First is even in the process of halacha. Really, the first step is that, we've talked about this before, that one of the first things that a master tries to do with a slave is to not let the slave think, is to maintain the slave as somewhat of an ignoramus, as not a thinking individual. It's a classic idea in the South in the 1800s. They didn't teach their slaves. They didn't want their slaves to have any education, and it was really a major problem if someone tried to teach a slave, because thinking, creates creates an individual who can start becoming a willful individual, a strong individual. So that's the first. That's the first step. So the point is that in that regard, already right off the bat, it's very interesting that the first event we have as a Jewish people, it's the first holiday we celebrate in the creation of the Jewish people, or the celebration of the creation of the Jewish people. Shimshon Paul Hirsch calls it the celebration of the creation of our nation, is Pesach. And when you look at the celebration of Pesach, one of the things that's major in the celebration is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's saying over the story of the Exodus. But la halacha, it has to be in a question and answer format. So the fact is, even it's about that in Shulchan Aruch, even if an individual is alone, right, he has to do Sipur Yetzias. He has to still do it in a question and answer format. He gets a question and he gets an answer. He has to answer himself. That's very, very interesting, because if you look at what we do, questions are so important. And see, we used to try. What do? We do this thing. We try and get the kids to ask questions, right? We want to try and raise their curiosity. Fact is that the mind is the first step in the development of the will. When you say that we want you to question, already it seems here's a system of authority saying one of the things we want you to develop is questioning, which means we want you to develop your curiosity. We want you to develop your openness, your perceptions of the world, your very aspect of being a questioner,
and even a criticism.
Exactly, because from questioning comes the possibility of challenging, right? Everyone tells stories about how Rahman al-San, back when in Hebrew schools, we asked a question, the teacher got very angry. We don't ask questions. It's perceived that you're challenging the religion if you ask a question. And that was such a sad presentation, because we encourage questioning, which can lead to the opening of the possibility of critiquing. Critiquing doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. It could be investigating to find out what's really going on. It could be the opening of understanding. So the point is the first thing you see is that this system of Torah, which is trying to say, hey, there's an external system of authority, it's coming across and saying, as part of its message, think, start using your mind. Okay? Right, and that's first opening of CB's tribe, of Pesach. Then we get into the very halachic system itself, the theory of halacha. Okay, and we pointed this out in previous term. The fact is God didn't just give us easy do's and don'ts. He gave us systems, and we have to think through it. You can't just know the halacha easily. You have to actually think through the halacha. You have disagreements in it. That already brings up more of the will, more of the individual. You have to think, right? There's a classic description of this. I might have mentioned it before. It's by Sri Lampert in his book, The Dynamics of Disputes. Rabbi Sri Lampert, the dispute of the dynamics of dispute, and I congratulate him on this analogy. And he said he got it from his Rabbi. He was in the Tzvei. He says, trying to understand Torah is like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle, because you have a jigsaw puzzle. You have a lot of information, a lot of the puzzles, but it's even more difficult than a jigsaw puzzle. Why? Because with the puzzle, you usually have the completed puzzle. Example, what the completed puzzle looks like at the end. That you don't have. You don't know what it's going to be in there. You have all these pieces, so you don't know. Second of all, some pieces are exactly the same, so you don't know if it fits here or if it's there. Third of all, they don't fit in very, very, very nicely. You have to push them in and so forth. So it's like a really difficult jigsaw puzzle. The learning Torah is almost like putting together a really difficult jigsaw puzzle with an indication of what you're looking for, with all these difficulties in terms of the pieces, and in the end, they don't fit so nicely anyways. You have to really, push them together. So he says that's how hard it is to learn Torah. And the fact is, that's the way God created it. So he really encouraged our minds. That was one thing we talked about. The second thing we talked about, and it was the fact that what God also did, and we quoted the Ramban on this, is that he also said that it's not enough just to take the outside authority, you have to extend the ideas. In other words, the ideas you pull out, you have to extend it. Kadoshim to you. Once you figure out something is this way, you have to figure out what Kodesh means. You have to come up with this concept, in other words, with constructs from the details, and extend these constructs. Apply them in new situations. That's Kadoshim to you. Or Vasita Yasher Ratov. You have to come up with an idea of Yasher and Tovar. Yasher means straight, Tov means good. These two concepts. And now you have to extend them to a new case. Okay? So the point is that in other words, you have to start thinking anew. New conditions, not just from the system of the outside authority, but the outside authority is giving you constructs that you have to now apply. This develops the will. So in a certain way, you're talking about this outside authority, but this outside authority is saying, and you have to develop a will. Okay, so we're actually feeding you information that's going to make you someone with your own will. Now, as we're going to go through this, remember the famous Medrash that says that the greater the person, the greater his yetzer, the greater his inclinations, right? The greater his yetzer hara, great inclinations. The fact is, this is really what we're talking about here. That one of the lessons of Torah is the strength and development of the will. So this system that sort of says there's an external authority telling you what to do, in that system it also is trying to feed you to say, okay, one of our messages, one of his measures is that you develop your own will. That you start developing your will. Now we just talked in terms of thought. where we're going to go today is the fact that this also touches into the emotions and into the being. Just when I get back to the will, it's not by coincidence, just talk about that in Jewish thought, the greatest problems we've had as Jews came from people who were thinking. Shabtai Tzvi was a pretty knowledgeable Kabbalist, also the false Messiah, right? The fact is that when you gain knowledge, and they say a little bit of knowledge can cause a lot of problems. So the fact is, you gain knowledge, and you gain these lessons, and you start applying knowledge. Okay? In other words, if God just say, do this, don't ask any questions, do this, don't do this, okay, I'll do it. But then okay, and here are the reasons why, and here's this reason, here's this reason. Then you start to, and not only that, you have to know the reasons, because you have this concept of Kedoshim Tiyu, of this concept of knowing how to apply the reasons in new cases, or the concept of Asita Yashra Tov, do what's right, and do what's just, what's right, and you have to develop them. So as you develop these ideas, well, sometimes a person makes a mistake, starts having his own perceptions. And maybe we should do it like this, we should do it like that, which is not really a halacha. And you see classic cases where people make mistakes because they start getting information. So that's one of the challenges of the Torah system. But the Torah, so some people say, so don't teach too much. Let's keep it quiet. Let's not tell the reasons. That doesn't work either. You may get the first level, you're going to do a few mitzvahs at the beginning, but you'll never be able to develop the concepts of how to apply it in new cases. So already the Torah is sort of saying to you, hey, yes, we start with an external system, but this external system is telling you to develop your own internal ideas, which can lead us into difficulties. I always think it's important to remember, in terms of understanding how people can make mistakes, that the Adat Korach, the congregation of Korach, Korach was considered to be the second biggest Talmid Chacham in the desert. Only Moshe Rabbeinu was a bigger scholar than he was. Okay, and he had all these questions on Moshe, and so forth and so forth. He had this challenge, that challenge, and so forth. But his congregation, they were told by Moshe Rabbeinu that you better not go out and burn the incenses tomorrow, because you're going to be in big trouble. In other words, this is what's going to happen. Okay, if you guys really believe you're right, go burn your incenses tomorrow. Okay, but if I'm right, it's not going to be good for you, right? And they were so convinced that they were right. They were so convinced they were right, they went out and burned their incenses. Remember looking at this, right?
It raises a question, since you brought it up.
Yes.
The answer is that everybody understood that only one person in the whole group was going to be the Kohen Gadol. It was either going to be Aaron or one of the congregation of Korah. It meant that everybody else was going to pay a penalty.
No. What it meant was this was the challenge of the test. Okay, the way I understood it I
thought one person was going to have their korban or their Ketores accepted.
I didn't get that impression. I got the impression of the Torah, because the truth is that I got the impression that it would come out that all this group would have the Torah taken as an example, that as an indication that Aaron was not the chosen one.
That they were all qualified to be Kohen Gadol.
Yeah, something like that. And then eventually there would be the choice of who.
But any of them would qualify to be Kohen Gadol, is what the test should prove.
The real understanding of it was, you see, now we're getting into a real difficult issue. What really was their challenge? Their argument was, according to some Meforshim, that the problem was not that Moshe wasn't doing something God told him not to do, right? They already had enough evidence that Moshe basically was doing, did what God told him to do. What they argued was that that God said, now choose someone to be the Kohen Gadol, and Moshe and went and picked Aaron. In other words, God said, you can choose to Moshe, and Moshe went and picked Aaron. So it wasn't that God said, Aaron's the man, it was that Moshe chose Aaron. And they said, hey Moshe, you should have been more democratic. They're choosing your brother for nepotism. We're not telling you that you're not abiding by God's law, but the way we understand it is that
you're corrupting it.
Well, you're not corrupting. God gave you a choice, and you chose that way, and we're saying you shouldn't have chosen that way, right? And what he was trying to say is, no, it wasn't my choice. It was directly HaKadosh Baruch Hu who said choose Aaron. You know, the problem with nepotism wasn't mine. You know, it wasn't my choice. But the fact is, so my understanding was that they were trying to show that anyone was qualified. Okay, and then we could have picked anyone. Okay, okay, that's what I'm saying. But now you've got me. Let's go look at Korach again, because that's. But the fact is that in any event, I'll give a little bit of a question about this. But the way I look at it is that if I was sitting there and saying, Moshe tells me I shouldn't do this, maybe I should. You know, maybe I should think twice about this. You know, but they were so convinced that they were right. They're so convinced by it. That's what people are. You develop your own thinking, your own will, your own perspective, and you develop some ideas. The point is that as the Torah develops the wills of the individual, as it gives information and challenges you to think, you're also developing the source of that which will eventually, perhaps, challenge Torah. So that's why it says the greater the person, the greater is the Yetzer Hara, is because the Torah on one hand is an authority system, but one of the things that Torah is trying to do also is develop the individual, and this leads into this leads into the fact is that there's thought. We're talking about thought, halakhic system, and going beyond the halakha. Now we're going to get into the being.
Just when you're going back to the process. But when we believe our Rabbanim that they have Das Torah, that they have the Torah to be able to take something and make something else out of it, we believe that Hashem has imbued them with something that they are able to do this. That's why we give them the authority to do it, no?
You're opening a can of worms there.
I'm hearing a little bit to the right from last week.
But she's got a good point.
There is what I'm pointing out is people are decision makers. What's happening is that there's a system that says do this. Okay, Torah says do this. But somehow the system is presented in such a manner that you need certain people to tell us what the system is saying. Right? That's really what you're getting at. The role of the Rabbanim is to sort of tell us what God is saying. Okay. Now, there's a lot of challenges how to do this and so forth and so forth. But what you are presenting is a fundamental disagreement or a fundamental issue in what does it mean that certain people have the ability to understand the Torah, to be able to tell us what God is telling us. That's what you're getting at, okay? And you can talk with the Torah and so forth. So the way I understand it is that there are two ways that could work, okay? From the analysis of Torah, there is a third category, I should just say, that's the Navi, is that there are additional people who basically tell us God's directions, who came after Sinai. So Shmuel HaNavi tells us certain things. Eliyahu HaNavi tells us certain things. Okay, and they're basically just doing the same thing that Moshe Rabbeinu did at Har Sinai, saying, hey, this is what God told me to do. But what we're talking about is we have a system of Torah, and how do we understand this system, right? In other words, because the system seems to be very cloudy, how do we understand what that system is saying? So there are two approaches to that. Okay? One approach is the approach that you're talking about, which defines Das Torah along the lines of Ruach HaKodesh. That somehow these certain individuals are given a special divine attribute, a divine power to be able to express what the Torah means. So their understanding is not the development from their own mind, their own will. They sort of have been informed of what the Torah is really trying to say. It's a perception of Ruach HaKodesh. And we have to uncover who these people are who are able to tell us what the Torah is saying. Right? And that is a supernatural system. Right? From, that these people have what we call Ruach HaKodesh, Das Torah. These are special people, and they're not bringing in their own analysis and so forth and so forth. They are representing what God wishes to inform us. And somehow God wishes to do that through these individuals. It might be because that they are good, righteous examples. So if we see individuals who are righteous, what happens is because of their righteousness, that indicates that they are pure vessels of God's transmissions, and therefore what they tell us is sort of directed by God. Okay, that's one viewpoint. But our job is to find those people and to listen to them and so forth. That's one approach. Okay. It would be approach of certain Hasidic masters, maybe Hasidic Rabbi, where they say, hey, there's some kind of special Havana, there's special knowledge, the Neshamas are special, there's special Ruach HaKodesh. It's out of their own it's out of their being, but not out of their own expression of will. That's one approach.
Give us an example of somebody today. Like you're saying, Shmuel Navi happened a long time ago.
That's right.
Who is it today that you can say is a Navi?
I don't tend to this perspective, but people talk that way, talking to us in Mekubalim. People talk about that way.
You talk about Dilei Hador like that?
Yes.
Like within Yashin or something like that?
Within certain perspectives of the Gedolei Hador, there is that understanding of Das Torah. Okay, so when the word Das Torah is used, it means that these group of individuals speak from a supernatural place.
Not from merit.
The merit of their righteousness has allowed them to be the conduits to express God's word. Okay, therefore they are recipients of Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, see what's very interesting, and I'm not one who favors this perspective. Okay, now this is not to say that no one has Ruach HaKodesh today, but the fact is there's a whole system within Judaism that challenges this, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the fact is that the perspective usually also tries to reinforce miraculous events. So if you hear stories about some rabbi that's a miracle, or some rabbi that sort of knew something about the future, which a rational person cannot understand, the perception is he had some kind of conduit to God to be able to know it. So he was a holy person, right? And that's what they're trying to say. He must be a holy man because he knew that this was going to happen 3 days in advance. There's a story about a Hasidic Rebbe who told one of his Hasidim that he should sell off his money and open up a hat store in some forsaken place on some desert highway and put all his money there. So he did it. Followed his Rebbe. So one day passes, get a customer. A week passes, doesn't get a customer. His wife is saying, put a lot of money into these hats. I mean, what's going to happen? I mean, like this store, it's great. I told you in advance, it's crazy. You open up a store on, outside, like on Route, whatever, Country Highway, 6. No one comes by here. What are you doing? The Rebbe told me to do it. I do it, right? So what happens? So this happens. He's getting ready. He's talking. The Rebbe told him to do it. He's going to do it, right? One day, it just so happens the king's going by. Okay, he was taking a shortcut down this highway with his whole entourage, and right in front of the store, his carriage breaks down. Okay, take a few hours to fix the carriage. It's going to take, I don't know, half the day. It's going to fix the carriage. So the king's in the carriage, right? What's he going to do? Everyone's getting fidgety. He's sitting in the case. He says, I gotta go out and stretch my legs. Goes out. What does he see? The store. So what else has he got to do? So he says, okay, let's all go into the store. Right? Every hat is sold. No bargaining. No discounts. What? The king's got a haggle. That hat costs $100. Fine, $100. You have to pay tax. No problem. I pay retail. I'm the king. There are no issues. The guy makes a mint. His whole stock is sold out, right? And like at the end of the day, he's on his way, right? Goes home and says, "What is it?" Goes thanks to the Rebbe, right? He's got to thank the Rebbe, right? A remarkable story about a Rebbe, right? A great story about the Rebbe. That's what you're talking about that attitude of Das Torah. Now, what makes this person have that type of conduit to God? His righteousness, his special neshama, his special soul, so forth and so forth. That's one perspective. That's a perspective that also is caught in the blind of what I'm doing, of what I'm discussing, because the fact is there are many people who don't like those type of stories on principle, right? Especially when it comes to halachic behavior or aspects of Judaism, because we have a concept in Judaism that says that a Navi cannot deal with halacha, right? If you have a question, it says Shmuel Navi made a halachic ruling. It's only in his role as a chacham, as a scholar, not in his role as Navi. A Navi cannot interfere in halachic process. That really is connected to the famous story of Tamar Shalchnai. I mean, God Himself can't tell us the law. We have to work it through ourselves through logic. So there's a whole other view of Das Torah, is that the uniqueness of following Das Torah is not because they are unique individuals, because they have some conduit to God. They're geniuses. They're Gedolei Hador. They're remarkable scholars of the law, right? And that perspective is, it's not because they have some kind of divine connection. It's because they are remarkable scholars, know their stuff, and the truth is, but in that regard, they're not qualitatively different; they're quantitatively different. Like as a scholar once said to me, we were talking about Moshe Feinstein, for example, and we're talking about the intellectual genius of Moshe Feinstein, remarkable knowledge. Like this person was telling me, he says the man can learn some of the most difficult, like commentaries in halacha, and that we could spend like hours on and days on trying to figure out all the things. He ran through it in an hour. He's such a genius. So the same person was talking about, we were all talking about the genius of Ramosha, the same person said, listen, if I was able to learn through a specific issue for 4 days, 5 days, maybe a month, right? Everything on the subject for a month, okay? It's quite possible I could get to have a disagreement with Ramosha in that particular issue, which I just spent, like a tremendous amount of time investigating, right? I might be able, because it's all it is a quantitative distinction. He's a genius. But it's like in any aspect of the quantitative distinctions. That certain people who may not be as much of a genius as the top genius, but if he spends a lot more time in a specific area and focuses on an area and knows that area, it's quite possible that in that one specific area, he may know it at least as well as the great genius. That's quantitative. It's not a qualitative distinction in terms of who has a conduit to God or not. So the point is, there's a whole perspective in Judaism that we're talking about. When we look at Das Torah or Gedolim or the great scholars of Judaism, it's a rational distinction, right? When I read Rav Moshe Feinstein's statements, it's not because I believe that Rav Moshe Feinstein had a conduit to the divine. It's because I recognize that Rav Moshe was an absolute genius who knew his stuff, who knew every argument, and not only that, Rav Moshe himself says it. That's the way he looked upon himself, and that's why in his beginning of his Igros Moshe he says, "I want you to investigate it, and I want you not to paskin, not to decide this because you're following my authority. Don't trust me. I want you to work it out and see if I'm right." And if you think I'm wrong, I want to hear your question. Right? You have to follow your own decisions. Of course, recognize that, take me seriously. I might know it better than you, but the fact of the matter is you check it out. And Rav Moshe, when he argued with other people, he didn't say it was because, I have more confidence. It's because I have a svara barura. I have a clear-cut, logical argument. That's the development of the individual. Now, people have difficulty with that because it seems to challenge the concept of God, and that's why it becomes, like I'm saying, in terms of the vice. Okay, when you think about the statements of great halachas, in a certain way, they almost are defending their own understanding of the law, and it becomes very much a statement of their own ability to understand the law. So some people find it a little bit egotistical, a little bit problematic, but the fact of the matter is, it's part of the Torah system in terms of developing the power of the individual. It's an interesting balance. You're basically doing this analysis in terms to understand what the imposition of the outside authority is upon me, upon other Jews, but at the same point in time, the system itself is telling you to do it by developing your own ability to make those decisions and to make those statements. So that's why that by the way, is a real issue in terms of how you understand Das Torah, understand these things, because the fact is, if you really perceive it as a development of their logic and their intelligence, it really becomes an aspect that the Torah is building up the individual. Right, and you see it also in certain. It's very interesting. You see this in terms of certain poskim. They were very strong individuals. You think about certain Torah scholars, right? And you read some works of some of these Torah scholars, and our image of a religious individual a lot of times is very quiet, and very humble, and almost like white bread. Then you read about the Torah people, the Torah scholars. They're like real individuals. They're like real interesting scholars. They had their really strong opinions. Very much like even like very much like remarkable personalities. It was really very much of expressions of themselves, which is very interesting, because it seems to me this authoritative system is really building up the expression of self. The same system that says, here's an outside authority telling you must do, Eved Hashem, servant of God, it seems that there's these other messages from the system which are sort of saying, you have to be your own person almost, within the system. So therefore, that's what it says. So halakha itself, the very halachic system, analyze it, things like that, recognize there's different opinions. Well, already I'm already making my own decisions. Even the decision of what rabbi you're going to go talk to. You know, the decision of what rabbi are you going to ask questions of. That already is your decision. It's already involved. And then we're told now you have to extend these things. What is beyond the level, the letter of the law. But what I want to get into is the fact that this also goes to the personality and the being, in the sense that God is also telling you, develop your personalities. And that, for example, is in the concept of Chovos Levavos, where the Chovos Levavos says, what does God want from you? It's not just your actions, right? It's not just your Avarim, the Chovos HaAvarim as he calls them, the obligations of your actions, of your limbs. I want your heart, the Chovos Levavos.
The belief.
Belief and values.